Meet our founders of the Bennett Decades Challenge. These are newlyweds Joseph and Kathleen Bennett. Their union was arranged, so they are still virtual strangers. Joseph makes many efforts to connect with Kathleen, but she mostly ignores him and instead focuses her energy on the many farm animals. You see, this was not the arrangement her mother promised her. She was being courted by a man she actually loved, Thaddeus. But he was a man of little means. Her mother deceived her in order to receive the dowry from Joseph. She found Joseph repulsive and did not want to be married to him. She felt like a prisoner. He was a wealthy farmer, so much of his time was spent tending to the crops, however. Any time she was in his presence felt like too much. She thought of Thaddeus often, of the life they would have had together if she hadn't been forced into this union. They would be poor and live in a lowly house, but they would be happy. They would have many children that she could dote on. The thought of Joseph's hands on her made her sick to her stomach. So the life she had imagined with children was off the table. She kept their home tidy because it was the only thing that kept her from going insane. Keeping herself busy was better than crying in her bed because there was nothing she could do to change her situation. She found slight solace in caring for the animals. She did not grow up around animals nor a farm, so she was learning how to properly care for the animals. She quite liked the quiet life on the farm. It would be perfect if Joseph wasn't on the premises. Joseph spent the majority of his days tending to the crops in his fields. It would soon be harvest season, and this was how he made his fortune. He knew that his new wife did not care for him. If he was honest, he didn't very much care for her either. Kathleen's mother had also deceived him. Joseph had asked for the pretty one, but he was not talking about Kathleen. He was talking about her sister, Mia. Regardless of the hopelessness she felt of her situation, it had been ingrained into her brain since she was a young girl to be a dutiful wife. She cooked her husband delicious meals every single evening as he came in from the fields. Dinner time was the only part of the day, as the newlyweds were in close proximity. Kathleen kept their conversations cordial but refused to give much away about herself or her feelings. Joseph did not care for silly conversations either. Instead, he told his wife that they would consummate their union that night. He had given her weeks of grace, but he was not getting any younger and he needed her to produce an heir. Kathleen could not object. No matter how much she wanted to, she was legally his property now. And she would rather do this willingly than have him force himself on her. She felt disgusted by his touch, his lips on hers, all of it. The intimacy was not satisfying for her, but she didn't expect it to be. This act was primarily to produce children, like a chore. She soaked in the bath for hours afterwards, until the water was cold, to try to feel clean again. To no avail. She found a new purpose after the act was completed for the month. She could be a mother, and that could fill her days with joy. One night a month with her dreadful husband wasn't terrible if it meant she could have little ones. Kathleen got up in the morning as early as her husband. He tended to the crops in the fields while she tended to and spent time with the animals. It was the highlight of her day to milk and pet the cow. Reluctantly, they fell into a routine together. The majority of their time was spent apart, but both parties preferred it that way. Kathleen still felt a deep disgust for her husband, but with each completion of the marital act, she felt more desensitized towards it. It was just another chore that she had to complete, and it was one step closer to becoming a mother. Joseph took out his frustrations of Kathleen not yet being with child by weeding his crops. He was sure that if he had married Kathleen's sister, Mia, she would have already bore him a son. Still, he tried to make his marriage work with Kathleen. They were bound by laws, so it would benefit them both if they were at least friendly with one another. As an act of good faith, Joseph prepared a picnic for them to partake. Kathleen showed little gratitude and went back inside once she was finished eating. She found him dreadfully boring to converse with. Kathleen met her sister at the produce market. Mia wanted to know every detail of her sister's marriage to the handsome farmer. Kathleen was about to share her woes when she noticed Thaddeus approach the market. Kathleen felt faint because this was the first time she was face to face with her lost love since her wedding to Joseph. He was as handsome as ever, against her better judgment. She embraced him because she never got to say goodbye. Thaddeus told Kathleen that it was good to see her. He shared that he had recently gotten married to a nice girl named Rosemary. Kathleen's heart shattered because she had a tiny glimmer of hope that he would sweep her away from her terrible husband and they would run far away from here. The permanency of her marriage never felt real until this moment. She knew that her only chance for joy in this marriage and in her life was to have children. For the first time since they wed, Kathleen initiated the marital act. She dug her old diary out of her trunks to memorialize what she was feeling in this moment. Thaddeus had moved on from her, and she was stuck in a marriage that she did not want with a man she did not love, or even care for in the slightest. Joseph smoked a cigarette after a successful harvest season. At least there was one thing in his life to have cause for celebration. His wife was unsatisfactory. He wished he would have been able to marry the pretty one, not the older fruitless one that he was in a loveless union with. Kathleen began to feel it every morning when she woke up to feed the animals. She prayed that this meant she was with child but felt hopeless. Kathleen's sickness began to worsen, and she was vomiting at least 3 times a day. She was either with child or had contracted an illness, but she was content with either one. An illness, and she was free from here, so both had happy endings. She kept her vomiting a secret from Joseph because she did not want him to be disappointed if this was not a pregnancy. So instead, she continued her wifely duties as if nothing was amiss. She waited on him hand and foot with freshly prepared meals. Joseph had been exhausted in the last weeks because he was planting his seeds for the next harvest season. He rested when he could. They spoke at dinner time like they usually did, but things felt different now. Joseph was not cordial with her anymore. He asked invasive questions about her monthly and demanded to know what was wrong with her since she had yet to become with child. Kathleen felt defective. Kathleen felt even more despair about being married to Joseph. At least before he was friendly with her. It was taking too much time to become pregnant, and now he was unsatisfied with her. Now she really was a prisoner. Joseph still insisted on being near her. He wanted to keep an eye out in case she was hiding that she was with child. He did not trust his wife. He knew how unhappy she was with him, and he didn't want her to do anything drastic. Kathleen was not normally a sugar eater, but she felt a craving for muffins. The craving was so intense that if she didn't get them, she was sure that she would cry. It was strange, but the muffin satisfied that feeling. Their union felt like it had changed overnight. Kathleen no longer felt repulsed by Joseph, instead feeling an innate need to be close to him. She hoped this meant that there was a baby in her belly that was drawn to him, not that she had completely lost her mind. She read every single book that Joseph had on his land. Kathleen hoped she was able to get some answers about what was happening to her. Her mother did not prepare her for this part of marriage. Joseph could not sleep in the middle of the night for fear that Kathleen was not able to produce him an heir, so he weeded the crops. Kathleen's suspicions were correct, and she was finally with child. She finally connected the dots when she didn't get her monthly and had gotten fuller in her stomach. When she realized she was with child, the first thing that she did was share the news with her husband. He had tears of joy and relief in his eyes. He embraced his wife and planted a loving kiss on her lips. He vowed that things would be different now that she was with child. Kathleen wasted no time in preparing for the little one that would be in their home in a few short months. She began to knit clothes for her baby. She used gender-neutral colors because she had a feeling it was a girl, but did not want to disappoint her husband. The morning sickness was unbearable, and she felt nauseous day in and day out. Kathleen invited over her mother and sister to announce the amazing news that she was with child. She still felt the undeniable hurt when she looked at her mother for putting her in this situation, but she pushed it to the side to celebrate the life growing inside of her. Her mother was overjoyed that this union had worked out after all. Continuing their legacy was all that mattered at this point, not the feelings of those involved. Kathleen announced her pregnancy to her sister. Mia was at a loss for words. Mia told her sister that she was happy for her, but Kathleen could see through her facade. Mia was unhappy that she wasn't carrying Joseph's child, but her sister was. Greta congratulated Joseph on the child that he and her daughter would soon have in their home. She was more happy for Joseph than she was her own child. Kathleen had always been her least favorite. Joseph poured he and Greta a glass of wine to celebrate, praying for a boy to continue their legacy. Mia excused herself to the bathroom to speak words of wisdom to herself in the mirror. She knew she was the better choice for Joseph, and felt angry at her mother and sister for halting her one true love. One way or another, she would be with the handsome farmer. Kathleen prepared an intricate meal for her mother and sister. Both women were very judgmental of her, so she had to make the perfect meal. A delicious meal may convince them that she was a worthy spouse for Joseph. A delicious meal could convince her sister to back off from her husband. She was not naive to the affections her sister had for Joseph. Kathleen announced that dinner was ready, and each member of her family sat at the dinner table. Conversation was strained during dinner, but Kathleen made the best of it. She wouldn't let these wretched women ruin the life growing inside her. After dinner had concluded, Greta and Joseph continued conversing. Joseph offered to house Mia until she found a husband. He ensured that he and Kathleen were happy too. Greta agreed to have Mia move in after Kathleen gave birth, so Kathleen had minimal stress during childbirth. Life for Kathleen and Joseph continued as usual after her mother and sister traveled back home. Kathleen was angry at her husband for not speaking with her before he offered up their home for her nasty sister to live in indefinitely. She could sense the ulterior motives her husband had for Mia moving into their home. She did not like it one bit. Kathleen objected this marriage since its inception, but they were bound by law. Joseph lusting after her sister was unacceptable, and she would keep a close eye. The anger in her grew with each thought of her husband's wandering eye. She was a model wife. She took care of the animals, cooked Joseph's meals, and satisfied him in the bedroom where it was necessary. There was nothing he could receive from Mia that he didn't already have with Kathleen. She knew once this baby was born, she would be an unwelcome member of her own house. She would not let that happen. Joseph tended to his crops in the fields, imagining the life he would live with both Castor sisters under the same roof. Kathleen struggled to complete her household duties as her belly continued to grow. Her body was swollen and ached after any physical activity. She pushed through it so her husband did not have a reason to complain. If there was one thing she liked to do the least, it was scrubbing her husband's dirty drawers. He may be handsome, but his personal hygiene was lacking. It repulsed her. She had to scrub stains out of his clothes for hours. But she had to admit, it was rewarding to hang up the clean clothes. She felt stir-crazy while in their home, so she spent the majority of her time outside. The fresh air felt nice on her face. She wanted to take advantage of the sun on her skin before winter came and she would not be able to escape her husband. She bonded with the animals. They were her safe place. She wished she were as free as they were. Not trapped, though. She was more optimistic for her future now that there was a little one growing inside of her. Joseph pondered the future while he smoked a cigarette in the garden. He was eager for Mia to move in after Kathleen gave birth. A presence would liven up his dull, boring house. He would have someone attractive to look at finally. not his homely wife. Good things were coming. He could feel it. Kathleen would go to bed even before the sun went down. Her body was tired and she felt uncomfortable. Her skin and organs were being stretched and moved in ways that were painful. After Joseph knew his wife was asleep, he came up to their bedroom to fall asleep himself. He did not have the patience to be cordial with that woman anymore, so he chose to avoid her instead. At least his dreams were void of Kathleen. Kathleen woke up as the sun rose with a piercing pain that coursed through her entire body. She felt so much fear as she was going into labor. She wasn't ready to give birth, and she was anxious that she wouldn't be the mother her child needed her to be. Joseph awoke from his slumber at the sound of his wife shrieking in pain. He was about to become a father. Kathleen tried to ease the tremendous pain she was in by taking a walk around the farm. She hoped it would induce labor, so the pain would subside and her baby would be in her arms. After hours of excruciating contractions that began to become more frequent, Kathleen felt the urge to push. She was terrified that pushing this baby out would rip her in two, and yet she was calm and determined. It was like her primal instincts had taken over. Joseph was surprisingly gentle and encouraging to Kathleen. He coached her through each contraction and stroked her hair and back. He complimented on how good she was doing and how strong she was to bring their baby into the world. The pain was excruciating, but Kathleen pushed harder, knowing that in a few moments it would all be worth it. Joseph held her close as she pushed their child into the world. Joseph made a last-minute prayer that this child would be his heir. Kathleen gives birth to a little girl. She chose the name Esmeralda because it sounded both beautiful and strong. Kathleen felt the urge to push again, and 2 minutes later, a second girl came into the world. Joseph chose to name her Frances after his grandmother. The new parents stared in awe of their 2 daughters. They had 2 beautiful little girls to love for the rest of their days. Kathleen felt grateful to have twins, so the girls would never be alone in the world. Joseph held back his disappointment for having girls. It was a problem for another time, though. For now, he would bask in the warmth he felt when he looked at his little girls. They were beautiful and they took his breath away. For now, he would simply be happy that he was a father.